McQuestion, for over 28 years talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McQuestion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future.
Socialism seems to be on the minds of every politician and media pundit. But guess what? Most of them don't even know what socialism is. And by the way, just what is democratic socialism? Well, fasten your seatbelts as our co-host, Jim Falk, President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth, is here to help me with this. So, Jim, welcome to the program.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you. Why don't you just tell Bob what he's supposed to say? Otherwise, you can just introduce him and let him tell us what he's going to say.
I think I'll go ahead and introduce him right now.
He's accustomed to being
We had a
told
good
what
talk
to
a
do.
few minutes ago. What he really likes to do is climb high mountains.
Yes, I know he does.
But Bob does hold the Jerome M. Fullerwider Centennial Chair in Economic Freedom and is the director of the O'Neill Center for Global Markets and Freedom at Southern Methodist University, associated with the Cox School of Business. Dr. Lawson is a co-author of the widely cited Economic Freedom of the World Annual Report, and we're going to be talking a lot about that on this program, which presents an economic freedom index for 160 countries.
Incredible stuff. Bob, welcome back to the program.
Good to be here, Dennis. Thanks.
And joining us via Skype is Lane Kenworthy. He's a professor of sociology and the Yankelovich Chair in Social Thought at the University of California, San Diego. His books coming up this fall are Social Democratic Capitalism, his new one. He's written stuff like The Good Society, 100 Things to Know, and How Big Government, or How Big Should Our Government Be, I should say. So, Lane, welcome to the program. We appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us, if you don't mind, what socialism is from your perspective, and whether or not this socialism is actually what we would define socialism as. And so democratic socialism is probably a little different, I think, but differentiate between that, would you?
Most of the people in the United States who these days are referring to democratic socialism really mean something that I would call social democracy, which consists mainly of an expansion of public, that is to say government, social programs, things like paid parental leave, early education, so child care and preschool, that earned income tax credit, sickness insurance, things along this line. Socialism, for most of those who've thought about it and debated about it over the last century, refers to an economic system where the government owns a lot of the property, owns a lot of the businesses, produces a lot of the goods and services that are sold. And I don't think, apart from some people who are, for example, members of the Democratic Socialists of America, a relatively small organization. I think it's got about 50,000 members. And one of our new House of Representatives members is a member of that. Some of them probably favor an economic system with more government ownership, more government production. But most of the, for example, Democratic candidates for the presidency, even if they, like Bernie Sanders, might refer to democratic socialism, they're really talking mainly about an expansion of the welfare state.
You know, Bob, there's going to be so much discussion about this in the 2020 election. What are do you really agree with that definition of socialism, and is what we're seeing in the platforms similar to that?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think we're in agreement with the terms. Socialism means the state owns and controls the means of production, the land, the labor, and the capital. Social democracy usually means the land, labor, and capital are owned by private entrepreneurs, private landowners, property owners, and they produce products, sell those products in private markets. So I think we agree on the terms, but actually I think this binary socialism, not socialism, or social democracy, I don't know what, free market democracy, these binaries aren't very helpful. I really think it's really more of a continuum from publicness on the one hand, countries where the public sector is involved in economic and social life sometimes to a great degree.
And give us an example.
Well, I mean, you could use Sweden. Some of the examples that Lane was using, where the state is running daycare centers. The state is not just running schools; they're running education or exercise recreation centers, and the state is organizing a lot of public services. So the organizational method is taxation, and then hiring people to execute, say, a daycare center. And so that's one extreme, and the more you do that, the more public you are. You can extend that into, public housing or other things if you like. The other extreme would be more privateness, more reliance on private owners, entrepreneurs, and business owners who provide daycares and rec centers and housing and all these other things. They provide that through markets.
And aren't we slowly really beginning to see in the United States the slide towards more of a welfare state?
Yeah, so the index that I was mentioned in the introduction is the Economic Freedom of the World Index, and the United States had always scored third on the scale behind Hong Kong and Singapore. The United States was certainly the largest, mostly free market economy, and the U.S. has definitely slid on our scale.
Beginning when?
Beginning around 2000. So I blame George W. Bush. I work at SMU, President Bush.
Well, the Bush Center is there. What the heck? He's close by. You can blame him easily.
Yeah, I should walk over and say, hey.
Got a problem here.
Yeah. The reality is, though, the reaction to 9/11 was more spending, more regulations, capital controls. And then we also saw some what we call our property rights numbers, which were mostly borrowed from the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. And those numbers began to decline. I think it had to do with a lot of sort of security state type changes in the 2000 period. All of those things may have been good public policy. They may have been necessary to fight the war on terrorism. But the fact is, at least the way we score, that moved that elevated the public sector relative to the private sector.
So we have fallen from 3rd to 16th. What other countries have fallen?
Actually, the only other country that's fallen over this period of any note is Venezuela. So the United States fell and Venezuela fell.
That's not very good company.
Not good company.
Hopefully we didn't fall that far. And so let me tell all my good free market conservative / libertarian friends this. And this came from my friend Jacob Hornberger, who you probably know, Bob, and he's been on our program several times. And the Future of Freedom Foundation, and he writes this to conservatives and some liberals and progressives and libertarians. He says, I'm a capitalist, not a socialist, except for my support of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public schooling, the Federal Reserve, immigration controls, the national income tax, the military-industrial complex, the welfare state, foreign aid, farm subsidies, the government-managed economy, the Postal Service, Amtrak, public works, the interstate highway system, and national parks. Now, other than that, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist. That's kind of where we are. Now, Lane, you know that we've got all these things. I'm thinking you're saying a few minutes ago that you want even more than this. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you.
How are we going to pay for it?
We're going to get to how we pay for it in a minute. I'm going to read your list, Lane, if I may. You mentioned a couple of them. Here's what your book says. You want universal health insurance, 1 year paid parental leave, universal early education, an increase in the child tax credit, sickness insurance, eased eligibility criteria for unemployment insurance, wage insurance, supplemental defined contribution pension plans with automatic enrollment, extensive personalized job search and retraining support, government as the employer of last resort, minimum wage increased modestly and indexed to prices, and EITC extended farther up the income ladder and indexed to the average compensation or GDP per capita, social assistance with a higher benefit level, reduced incarceration of low-level drug offenders, affirmative action shifted to focus on family background rather than race, expanded government investment in infrastructure and public spaces, and an increase in paid holidays and vacation time. Is that about it, Lane?
Yes, that's right.
Now, would you mind telling us why you would want to add all of that onto what we already have, which is what I consider a welfare warfare state already?
Well, the